Hello, everyone. My name is Anna Messenger, and today I'm going to be talking about the impact that psychology has had on me. Psychology has completely shifted my perspective on everything in and about the world, and I've been able to become increasingly more self-aware, and that has helped me become a better person in every area of my life. The awareness that I have gained from studying psychology, not just about myself, but about others, has also let me utilize the various psychological perspectives that I've learned about. According to author Kendra Cherry, the main psychological perspectives are cognitive, biological perspective, the humanistic, behavioral, social, and psychodynamic perspectives of psychology. And all these perspectives have been able to shape my own beliefs and understandings about why humans, including me, make the decisions that we do. And these perspectives have also given me tools to approach problems and questions that I have regarding my relationship with myself and my relationship with others. A specific example of how psychology has changed my way of thinking and understanding others is something that happened when I I joined the Navy right out of high school, and I was immediately put into this extremely different culture than I was used to growing up. And I didn't really understand or know the things that I do now, obviously about psychology and about culture and about things like group behavior and peer pressure. And you hear about peer pressure all the time in like high school or like doing drugs or stuff like that. But I realized that when I joined the Navy, there was a huge culture regarding the use of nicotine and smoking cigarettes or vaping, and I had no desire to do any of that before I joined the Navy and put myself in that culture. But in order to meet new people and make friends outside of like the training and the jobs and the high stress environment that I was a part of, a lot of people would meet in smoking areas. And so I ended up just going there and I just started smoking because that's what everyone else was doing. And I didn't really think it would have any lasting effects. And because of all the courses I've taken, like regarding physiological psychology, I understand, and like biological psychology as well, like kind of the more biology side, I've realized that like the cultural psychology kind of meshed with all the different perspectives, and they all impact each other in different ways. The global issue that I'm going to be talking about is suicide. And according to researcher and author Mueller and his co-workers, the past 20 years have seen dramatic rises in suicide rates in the United States and other countries around the world. These trends have been identified as public health crisis and urgent need of new solutions, and have spurred significant research efforts to improve our understanding of suicide and strategies to prevent it. The World Health Organization outlines a lot of facts about suicide that I'm just going to read off. So, more than 700,000 people die due to suicide every year. For every suicide, there are many more people who attempt suicide, and a prior suicide attempt is the single most important risk factor for suicide in the general population. Suicide is the fourth leading cause of death among 15 to 29-year-olds. And this is globally, not just in the United States. 77% of global suicides occur in low and middle income countries. And ingestion of pesticides, hanging, and firearms are the most common methods of suicide globally. The strongest risk factor for attempting suicide is a previous suicide attempt. Understanding methods of which suicides are attempted and committed can help create a way to approach suicide prevention because the information can be used to educate people on the risks of suicide, and it can limit access and the means of preventing suicide, such as the firearms or the medications or pesticides as mentioned before. A lot of the problems that come when addressing suicide is the stigma and the taboo that's associated with it because it is such a heavy subject and it does impact a lot of people globally. Raising awareness is crucial in preventing suicide. So raising awareness can look like having conversations about the signs and the symptoms and even the feelings of suicidal thoughts, ideations. And having these conversations can help bring awareness to the issues and the permanent effects of suicide. According to the World Health Organization, only a few countries have included suicide prevention among their health priorities, and only 38 countries report having a national suicide prevention strategy, which is something that can always be improved. Another major challenge regarding suicide is the lack of quality data that comes with trying to analyze suicide. Data, according to the World Health Organization, data relating to the cause of death is already poor quality. So with the increased sensitivity of suicide, underreporting and incorrect classifications are major problems associated with data about suicide. And a lot of this can also be associated in different cultures because different cultures have different feelings about suicide. Like in the United States, it's a very sad, it's a very dark and depressing thing. It's a very real thing, but it's not covered up as much as it is in societies and cultures that are more centered on honor or are more worried about protecting the honor of individuals or families. Suicide is a unique global issue because the range of those affected is not limited to any race, culture, ethnicity, religion, gender, age, or geographic location. So going on to the main three schools of thought that I'm going to be covering, these are cultural, behavioral, and cognitive. So starting with the cultural school of thought, or the cultural perspective of psychology, one of the earliest theories that was postulated was constructed by French sociologist Emile Durkheim in 1897. Durkheim constructed a psychological theory regarding suicide that stated or concluded that the more socially integrated and connected a person is, the less likely he or she is to commit suicide. So as social integration decreases, people are more likely to commit suicide. One of Durkheim's main experiments examined the suicide rates between Protestants and Catholics. He found that suicide was less common among Catholics, and he believed that this was because of the stronger social cohesion between Catholics. So Durkheim also developed a way of classifying suicides based on social effects and facts. So I constructed this little chart that visually represents the 4 different classifications of suicide that Durkheim constructed in 1897. So there's the integration axis of society, and so the more integration that a society has, so the more collective society has, he classified that an individual is more likely to commit altruistic suicide. And then on the other end, the more individualistic a society is, then he classified that as an egotistic suicide. And then on the regulation axis, regulation is basically the amount of rules or the amount of government that a society has. So the more rules that a society has, he classified that as realistic, and then the less rules is a noun. According to Crossman, Durkheim viewed suicide as a symptom of society and believed that socially defined ideas of morality, rules, and norms, and the rate at which those shifted, so the rate at which societies moved along these axes, either becoming too loose or too overbearing, were the main predictors of suicide. The next school of thought, or the next psychological perspective that we're talking about, is the cognitive perspective. And in 1996, psychologist Antoine Lenars developed a multi-dimensional model of suicide. And Lenars examined both the specific and general elements of suicide in order to form a more complete picture during analysis. So according to Olson, he interprets both intrapsychic and interpersonal features to decipher what drives an individual to suicide. So some of the intrapsychic elements include intense psychological pain, tunnel vision, and the inability to cope with problems. So kind of the becoming constricted cognitively. And then the interpersonal factors include factors relating to other individuals, so things like negative or frustrating relationships, rejection, loss, abandonment, and the need to escape. And Lenars emphasized that the combination of these factors creates a multidimensional malaise that attempts to explain why someone might commit suicide or has suicidal ideations or thoughts. Both Durkheim's theory of suicide, the one regarding social connections that individuals have, and Lenars' multidimensional theory, both attempt to understand suicide and why someone might commit or have the ideations of suicide. But Durkheim only focuses on cultural reasons and theories, and he does not take into account the uniqueness of the individual experience regarding relationships in social settings, how Lenars did. Is a more contemporary theory. From the behavioral perspective, in 1990, the escape theory of suicide was proposed by Roy Baumeister, and his theory analyzed suicide and suicidal ideation, particularly in males. And he constructed a 6-step sequence that leads to suicide or suicidal ideation. So the first step in a sequence is falling short of standards or failure to comply to the high standards that are either self-imposed or imposed socially. Um, the next is the internalization of self-blame, or the cycle of failing and blaming self. So this first part creates kind of this circle, this cycle that can continue, and it can eventually lead to aversive sense of self or low self-esteem, even if you still view others highly. And then the negative effects or consequences, or the negative consequences of the previous, so of aversive sense of self, they can manifest as depression, anxiety, or anger, and it creates this negative feedback loop between these two steps. And this eventually leads to the idea of cognitive constriction, which was also previously mentioned in Lenar's theory, and it's the idea of feeling stuck emotionally and mentally, and even sometimes physically, and it can also be described as tunnel vision. So this all eventually leads to reckless behaviors, the absence of emotion and irrational thoughts. So these all kind of come in a sequence that leads to an individual feeling like the only way to escape is suicide. And another theory that relates to the behavioral perspective or the behavioral thought train in psychology is the interpersonal psychology theory proposed by Thomas Joyner in 2005. And according to Thomas Joyner, the interpersonal psychology theory of suicide behavior proposes that an individual will not die by suicide unless he or she has both the desire to die by suicide and the ability to do so. So this is a graph that I made that I was reading a psychological review of the theory by Orden et al. From 2010, and this is a graph that kind of explains that. So the idea of thwarted belongingness combined with perceived burden, so the feeling of like I'm a burden and I'm alone, those two combined create the desire for suicide. And then when those two are combined with the actual capability or means for suicide, that's when it becomes extremely dangerous and when it's lethal or possibly near lethal. Another small little theory or idea that I came across as I was doing my research was the idea or the term psychic that was coined by Edwin Steinman. According to Olson, it was coined by Steinman in 1993. He was one of the first suicidologists, and he believed that a psychic was a common factor among all suicidal individuals, no matter their culture or geographical location or any of the other factors. He believed that psychic was common among all suicidal individuals. And Steinman also influenced a lot of Lenar's work on the multidimensional theory of suicide. According to Steinman, psychic is defined as the hurt, anguish, soreness, and aching psychological pain in the mind. It is the pain of shame or guilt or humiliation or loneliness or fear or angst or dread or growing old. And I think that one ties together all of the theories that I've talked about because regardless of whichever school of thought or psychological perspective that I've talked about regarding suicide, a commonality among all of them is this feeling of soreness or this ache that seems inescapable. Suicide affects every single culture, gender, and age group. And although suicide can impact every single community in the world in one way or another, there are still specific groups that have higher rates of suicide. According to the Center for Disease Control, these groups include veterans, people who live in rural areas, sexual and gender minorities, middle-aged adults, and tribal populations, all may disproportionately experience factors linked to suicide. These factors include things like substance use, financial or occupational problems, relationship problems, physical or mental health problems, and or the easy access to lethal means, according to the CDC. So studying and understanding some of the psychological theories has helped me gain a better understanding of why some of these groups are more susceptible to suicide. And this kind of ties in, even though dark time theory is one of the earliest theories, dating back to 1897, it covers, or it encapsulates the social aspect of psychology and the cultural aspect and how one's culture and society and the structure of that society impacts an individual on such an intimate level. Utilizing psychological theories that fall into multiple thought categories, the multiple thought categories that I've spoken about, psychologists are able to develop useful methods of treatment and therapies, especially designed for suicidal individuals. So society can contribute to solving this huge issue of suicide globally by addressing these different theories and using them to create treatments. So according to author and researcher John D. Matthews, the goal of treatment for the depressed suicidal patient include address specific cognitive biases and distortions that can be created from many different factors. Develop behavioral skills such as problem solving, acceptance and tolerance of emotional pain, and improve communication skills. So things like social skills, assertiveness training, conflict resolution skills, reduce environmental stress, and develop supports. Thomas Joyner, the suicidologist who constructed the interpersonal psychological theory, is also confident in the ability of psychologists and therapists to use theories to develop therapeutic practices that target suicidal patients specifically. As a member of society, one of the most important things that I can do regarding suicide and the permanent and the heavy effects is continuing to have conversations about it and bring awareness and making sure that I'm educating those in my family and my friends and my acquaintances about the signs and symptoms and even some of the simple ideas that support the theories that I've described can help bring awareness to the issue, which can help make sure that when people are aware of something and educated about something, it's a lot easier to have these conversations about it. And it all comes down to that one individual that gets stuck in this loop or these behavioral patterns they become almost inescapable. And if one person is able to recognize those and understand the psychology and the theories behind it, all these different things, it can also help the individual, and it can help the individual feel supported that's struggling. And it can also help bring awareness to things like the capability or the means of suicide. So, like, making sure that there's important information on things like substance use and abuse, the danger of using chemicals or pesticides, gun safety, and medication safety. So having all these different theories to back up the education on why these things are important, you know, of suicide. And suicide impacts diversity, equity, and inclusivity because there is no group or culture that is immune to suicide. Psychology as a discipline can provide solutions through developing theories and different perspectives. Another perspective that I think is really interesting regarding suicide specifically is the biological perspective. And I didn't really touch on this one at all, but I think there's a lot of interesting and new research regarding biological markers that can help predict or determine if an individual will commit suicide or has suicidal ideations. A lot of things like the amount, like the serotonin receptors that are similar to issues with depression, and things like behavioral patterns like sleep, nutrition, hydration, all of the basic pillars of health and wellness also can relate to suicide. And but overall, this project has helped me use the information that I have learned through the years of studying psychology and all the different perspectives and schools of thought of psychology and how it applies to suicide. Thank you for watching. Let me know if you have any questions. I hope you all have a great rest of your day and term, and good luck with everything.